carry on. So when Leslie asked me to do this, I was very excited. It's actually something that I'm very passionate about, and I agreed immediately to put a presentation together. Then I started to put some slides together and realized that this is a very, very big and complicated topic. Leslie was also kind enough to send through to me a lot of the would you like to get from this session comments that you filled in when registering for the session, and I've been through that and I've tried to cover as many points as possible. I'm not quite going to dump Leslie in this, but I did mention it to her before this meeting that actually I think this subject is bigger than just a presentation from one person. This to me is probably a workshop of a period of time so that people can share experiences and opinions, and we can work through it, and hopefully we might be able to do that at the art conference when it next comes up, which sounds like an excellent place to do something like that. Anyway, let's move on to the first slide then, which is obviously, as we start with all this, an introduction, and as I start all my presentations with a disclaimer. So first of all, this is not a one-stop shop to success. So as I said, this is a very big and complex topic, and there are lots of opinions and views and people's experiences that can be drawn on to get success from this particular subject. As I say, there are many thoughts on this, many ideas. These are mine. This is the way that I work with young ringers, and I would offer them up as ideas, not as something that everybody needs to follow. And finally, in the disclaimer, some of my thoughts may not be shared by all. There are going to be people that disagree with some of the things that are in this presentation, but nonetheless, they are here. Okay, so some topics we're going to cover. Now, another thing about this is when I agreed to do this, I thought it was a really good idea, and then I got the invite to register for the session, and it said, do you want to know how to make your mixed age practice appeal to and engage children? And I thought to myself immediately, I wasn't going to talk about that. And I actually wasn't. But I've had a think now, and I am going to cover it. And hopefully it will be clear to people why I wasn't going to cover it in the first place. We'll also touch briefly on recruitment. I think that's quite important. It's not actually part of the subject. There's only one slide on that, and we'll go through it quickly. But recruitment is something that is related to this. We'll talk about engaging at the right level with the children. We'll talk a little bit about inspiring and retaining young ringers. In fact, that probably goes for all ringers as well, anybody that's starting new. And we'll talk about parents and safeguarding and communication. The subject of young ringers, we can't go through this without touching on safeguarding, even be it only briefly. It is a very important part of what we do. So let's start with the first one then, the mixed age practice. And the reason that I wouldn't talk about it is I wouldn't do it. Now, that seems a bit odd. Why wouldn't I do it? But I will caveat that with I wouldn't do it, at least not straight away. Now, first impressions for young ringers are everything. And to turn up for the first time as part of a practice of adults, and maybe some other young ringers as well. It's a big evening, there's a lot going on, there's lots of hustle and bustle, they might get to do a few backstrokes, etc. And that first impression can actually be quite daunting for a young person. And it's probably not the best way, in my view, to introduce young ringers to ringing. Rope time is also everything. Now, if you take a new ringer, be it a young ringer or an older ringer, to teach them handling at your main practice, they might get 10, 15 minutes of rope time, if that. It will probably take them an eternity to learn how to handle a bell. although I would say that young ringers are much, much better than older ringers at learning to handle. Their muscle memory kicks in very, very quickly. And actually, I would suggest that there is a stronger opportunity of losing a young ringer if they just get introduced into a mixed age practice straight away. So now, what I would propose doing, and this is my view, is engage a small number of appropriate adults to help in a youth practice. Now, that's not always straightforward, because the ideal world, we would all like more than one youngster in our group, but that doesn't always work. But it's very, very important that when the young ringers come in, that the appropriate adults are involved. Now, the days of your shouty tower captain and your ringer that doesn't understand children at all, that shouldn't happen, first off, because that will immediately put them off. So engaging the appropriate people to help with youth practices is really, really important. Ideally, go out and find some other young ringers. If you only have one young ringer who wants to join your tower, ask around some other towers. Ask around your branch, your district, your guild, and see if there are any other young ringers close by that can join up to make a larger practice of younger ringers. Try not to be too parochial about this ringer must be a member of this tower. The idea is we want to get the young ringers up to speed and interested and engaged, and then introduce them to the towers and the local practices. Introduce them to other band members before the big scary main practice. I've already said that practice is quite often a busy environment. There's a lot going on. There's lots of words being used that they don't understand, and bands being placed and moving around. And to know some of the people that are going to be at that practice beforehand really will help put these young ringers at ease, in my view. So integrate the ringers into the main practice only when they can fully participate. If they're turning up just to ring a few backstrokes in between a few touches, or ring a few hand strokes, or put it all together, or whatever, that's not good rope time for them, and it's not actually a particularly good use of their time. When they get to the point where they need the support of the main practice, they want to start ringing methods, and they need the assistance of the more able and experienced older ringers. That, in my view, is the point at which we should introduce young ringers to the main practice. So I'll finish here with a bit of a statement, which is a view of mine. To better achieve good progress and improve retention, I believe it is important that young ringers engage and ring with their peers as a priority in the early stages. So it goes back to actually trying to get groups of young ringers together. Even if you have to reach out a long way, try to get them together in groups so that they know there are other young ringers out there, and it's not just them. There was an example when, and I know Simon Linford's on this call, and there was a bit of a survey of young ringers, and I believe there was some feedback from some young ringers in Ireland that didn't even know other young ringers existed, and that's a bad place to be. So they need to understand that there are others around. Okay, so let's move on from that one then. I wanted to cover that first because I really wanted people to understand why I wasn't actually going to talk about it. I'm actually pleased that I have now. I wasn't going to talk about it because it's not something that I actively do. I do it slightly different way. Okay, so recruitment. I won't take a long time over this. Leslie's already mentioned I lead the Schools and Youth Groups work group on Central Council. I'll just run through what that work group is doing and what people on this call might be able to get from that work group in the not too distant future. Hopefully by the end of the year, there will be some materials available to help people with this. So the idea of the youth group, of this group, is to promote ringing to start with national youth groups. You'll see a few logos up there. You've got Scouts, the Guides, the obvious ones, Girls Brigade, Boys Brigade, Young Farmers, etc. and to provide people with the tools and resources to understand how to engage those youth groups and get them involved at their local tower and in ringing overall. We're also working very hard. There's one of the members of, in fact, 3 of the members of the work group are teachers, and one of them is actually somebody that works for Ofsted, who is actively developing a set of national curriculum lesson plans for years 5 and 7, which we are hopeful will be able to roll out at a national level to schools that are interested in offering something different. What we have learned from this is schools are very, very interested in different subjects, or different topics to lead into their subjects. There was a recent visit to a school in Worcester where I saw a bell ringing related lesson delivered in both drama and history, and it was very interesting at the engagement of the kids and the understanding that they got about ringing from those lessons. So that is something that is coming along. So we're also putting together a lot of paperwork about local engagement strategies and advice. So how do you get in contact with your local scout group, your Girl Guiding group? How do you get in contact with young farmers, and how you get people involved in Duke of Edinburgh? All of that is being put together as a series of 1-pagers on how to engage with these different organisations, and what you can do with groups from those organisations when you get them to a tower or a church, etc., to keep them engaged. Another big topic is Duke of Edinburgh. You hear a lot of the time, and this is around retention mainly, that we'll get candidates for Duke of Edinburgh that have chosen to do bell ringing. They do their bronze or their silver, their 3 or their 6 months, and they get a tick in the book and then disappear. In fact, quite a considerable amount of work has gone into producing a set of DofE guidelines and to help people set expectations of what people need to achieve to be able to get sign-off for DofE, rather than just turn up for 6 months, get a tick and disappear. And finally, just to point out that all of this will soon, and I'm very hopeful by the end of the year, that a number of these pieces of material will be available on the Central Council website. There'll be a communication via the Ringing World and various online forums that these are available, and they will be free to use for anybody that wants to engage with youth. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic then that I listed up front, which was engaging at the right level. Now, the first thing that I try and do is I try to become a child again, or at least remember what it was like to be one. Now, if you try and engage with a young person at your level and not theirs, you'll lose their attention very quickly. You need to try to come down to the level of the child and not speak down to them or patronize them or anything like that, but speak to them at a level that they can understand, and they will be enthused by. I think that's really, really important. I'm not necessarily suggesting people become children. That's just silly. But you can talk to young people like they're sort of equals, and I think that helps. I don't need to tell anybody this, that they're all different, and actually what's fun for one young person might not be fun for another young person, and actually it's a case of getting to know them individually and working out what makes each one of those young ringers tick. Now, that's not necessarily easy. Some young people are not very forthcoming in what they would like to do. They're not very forthcoming in terms of communication, etc., and it's hard to work out. But unless we work out what makes those individual young ringers tick, they could lose interest very quickly. Teenagers in general are quite different to those that are younger. They become more stroppy is one word. Difficult to engage with is another way of putting it. And actually, I have found, certainly with young ringers growing up, they sort of reach the teenage years around 13, 14, and it's like a switch. They become a different person. And when you're engaging at the teenage level, I've found it is very, very different to engaging with much, much younger ringers. I think it's easier to engage with 12 and unders than it is to engage with a teenager, because they're less interested in what you want to say. They've got their own agenda to a certain extent, whereas the younger ones haven't so much. So it's more difficult and it requires more work. Try to avoid contact with those that don't get it. Now, this goes back to the old Victorian style shouty tower captain, children shall be seen and not heard. Those people don't get it. Children aren't like that. They're not going to respond to that these days. And in fact, we've got to be able to engage with them, because it's no longer something that automatically happens for them. They don't automatically turn up to church on a Sunday now. They're not automatically engaged with the church. This is something very different for them. And they need to be engaged and encouraged and motivated. It's no longer what I would call a duty for them to do. And there are fewer of them as well, which is not good. When I was learning, I learnt with a group of 6 other young ringers. It was excellent. I had people that were on my level all the time. There was a bit of competition between us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But there are very few around, so being able to give them a good experience is very, very important. Okay, so another one of my statements, I like to make statements, is young people will generally respond better to those who take the time to understand them than those who do not. I think that's common sense, although it is worth pointing out. I'd like to talk about some teaching strategies. This is quite important, and the first point is important as well. Is make sure the bells are suitable. Can your young ringers manage them? If you're from an unusual situation of let's say a 30 hundredweight 8, and you want to teach young ringers, take them somewhere else. Teach them to handle, in my view, on some bells where they won't feel frustrated that they can't manage them. I'm not for 1 minute saying it's impossible to teach people on heavy peals of bells. It's not, but it is more difficult, and you'll take them elsewhere and they'll break them. So it's really important to make sure the bells are manageable for the young ringers, especially the really young ones that are quite small. Fast track the handling, but do it well. One of the places that I have failed in the past is not getting the handling out of the way quickly enough. I initially started, I think, teaching my first few ringers that came from the younger generation at the main practice night. And as I said earlier, we might have started half an hour early. They probably got a little bit of handling during that half an hour, a little bit of chatting. During the main practice, they might got another 10 minutes of rope time. And by the time they got to week 3 and 4 and they couldn't handle the bell, they'd lost interest. So I strongly feel that getting the handling sorted out quickly so that they can handle a bell and then start to do some things that are more interesting, that's a good thing. If you've got access to a dumbbell and you can do an extra night, or you can do a crash course on a Saturday or a Sunday, or both, or whatever, that is a good way to approach it. Goals and targets. Now, children tend to work to goals and targets most of the time, and I think that's really important for them as well. They need to know what they're aiming for. Now, I'll just give a couple of examples of how you can do this, and Leslie will like this. The first thing you can do is sign them up for learning the ropes, and I would advise doing that. It's a good scheme, and it gives them something to work towards in a structured way. And the slightly more old-fashioned way of doing it is the one per learner book, where it has all of the stages that they can sign off, and they have a little book that belongs to themselves, that they can get little ticks and stars and things in. So set some goals and targets, and give them something to aim for, and feedback on their progress as well. That's also really important. Competition. Wouldn't it be great if we had several learners like I did when I was learning in this group of 6 people? The competition between us within that group was great. We all wanted to be the one that could stand our bell at backstroke 10 times in a row. We all wanted to be the ones that could ring perfect rounds and then move on to ringing the treble and inside to bob doubles the quickest. And it was inspirational. But the competition needs more than one learner, which takes us back a little bit in what I said earlier, in actually get together with other young ringers and hold some joint practices so that you can work through it as a group. Gamify. Now, there's a word that people probably haven't heard. If you haven't heard of it, look up gamification on Google. Really, it is taking something that's serious and making it appear like a game, so that it's more fun and more engaging. But it's important that when that's done, that standards are maintained. Making a game of it is really good, but if that actually is counterproductive and the standard of ringing goes down, that doesn't work. So just a few ideas of things that I do with the young ringers. There's forwards and backwards rounds. So I'm not going to go through what these are. So there's relentando and accelerando, where they start to ring more slowly and more quickly in rounds. Both of those exercises are really good for bell control and teaching how to ring faster and slower, obviously. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. There's nothing wrong with ringing some tunes on some tower bells. That's also fun for them and is also good for bell control, especially if you're trying to teach standing at handstroke and backstroke. And there are some other things you can introduce into the ringing as well. I've put boom whackers in there, for instance, and for those of you that don't know what they are plastic tubes that are tuned to notes, and you can take them and you can tap out rounds and queens and titums, and if they're clever enough, you might be able to ring some plain hunt on them. But introduce something that's a bit more fun. And the last thing I just want to point out here is there's no rush. I've been in it. I've had experience of some areas where I've been to practices, and there just seems to be this immediate rush to get to surprise major, and to get there as quickly as possible and throw everything else to one side and not worry about it. For young ringers, I think being active with their peers will definitely be enough to keep them engaged, especially early on in their ringing career. The really young ones, they might not ever progress from rounds and call changes for a very long time, but there's nothing wrong with that. If they're engaged and they're enjoying it and they're having some games, you can keep hold of them until they're able to progress through the change ringing. They've got improved bell control. It's a good thing to do. Don't push too hard in the fear of losing somebody, because I don't honestly think that would happen. Okay, so inspire and retain. Sorry. So here's a spoiler alert. There's no guarantee that ringing will inspire a young person, and there will always be attrition. And we mustn't be afraid of that. There are going to be some that we teach that just don't enjoy it and any aspect of it. And we shouldn't think that we have necessarily failed because some of the young ringers leave. It's going to happen. It's not for everybody. We would love to keep every one of them, but It doesn't happen like that. I'm going to mention it again. The handling. Focused and frequent and regular sessions on handling to get it good and sorted out quickly. Spending too long on the handling, I think, is a place where we lose people, and it doesn't inspire people learning to handle the bell, not most anyway. Help them understand what good looks like or sound like in our case. So the learners need to understand what they're aiming for. So if you just progress through the stages, they ring some rounds, they might not know whether they're good rounds, and they might not know whether they're bad rounds because they've never had anything to compare them with. Help them understand what they're aiming for in terms of what they're trying to achieve, and that can be done using online media. So there's lots of clips on YouTube of good ringing. I think you can probably find them on the Central Council website. I know there's a YouTube competition for good striking. I wouldn't say every entry into that competition I would necessarily call good striking, but you can certainly find some good ringing for them to listen to. If they can listen to it early on, they know where they're going. If they just carry on without understanding, they may never get it. Telling somebody they're slow at backstroke doesn't help if they don't know what they're aiming for initially. Provide a comfortable, safe and pleasant environment. The dusty belfry at the back of the church that hasn't been cleaned for 10 years has got a table in the corner with a 1988 annual report of the ODG on it, and a blackboard that's got some stuff scribbled on it on the side, is not somewhere that somebody wants to be. Some people can't overcome that because that is what their tower is and what it looks like. But I think first impressions are very, very important. If you walk into a place that's clean and tidy and pleasant and somewhere that somebody wants to be, then they're more likely to be engaged and things like that. Onboard the parents, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about parents in an upcoming slide. If you haven't got the parents on board, it's a bit of a problem. We really need the parents. I'm not going to talk too much about it now because there's a slide that covers it later on, but make sure that the parents are engaged and understand. Let them know. Now that those bullets have come up in an odd order, I don't mean let the parents help with safe, simple jobs. I mean let the young ringers help with safe, simple jobs. It helps them feel part of what's going on. Even something as simple as somebody's job is to put the ropes on the spider at the end of the day makes them feel part of the proceedings. But find some safe and simple jobs that they can engage with that are outside of the actual ringing. I've already covered this. Fun for one person may not be fun for another, and I think it's very, very obvious. Some young ringers will be very interested in the history of ringing. Some will be interested in the operation of the bell. Some will be interested in the methods, and there are so many aspects of ringing, and it's important to try and understand which one they're most interested in and help them get involved in it. So, because individuals are inspired by different things, I do not believe there is any single strategy to inspire and retain all young ringers. That sounds really negative, but it's not. It's the truth. And all that really says is we need to work harder to understand the children and the young ringers that we want to engage with. It's up to us to work on it and get at the same level as the people that we're trying to inspire and retain. Belonging. Now, young people, like most adults, they do want to be part of something. Now, part of ringing. What is part of ringing? It's nothing really. It's very vague, and it doesn't really say very much. Also, when it gets down to smaller groups, guild, branch, and tower membership will mean little to most young people these days. They certainly won't understand what the guild is. They might understand what the branch is, and they'll understand what the tower is. But it's not necessarily something that is going to motivate them and make them want to be part of something. So we want to make them part of something that they can relate to. Regular youth-specific gatherings. So as well, I went right back to the beginning of the presentation, get young ringers together and get them ringing together and engaged in their peer group. Give the group an identity, a name, and the Brumdingers, for example, help them understand. Giving the group a name and an identity, I think, is really, really important. When I was running the ODG youth team, one thing that was also important was individual identity. So all of the ringers had a shirt with their bell number and their name on it, and it made them feel part of the team and the group. And it really does, in my view, inspire and help them become part of it. The Young Change Ringers Association. Now that's relatively new, and I think I spotted Matt Jerome join this call earlier on. Now Matt is one of the people that's been responsible for setting up the Young Change Ringers Association, and they can be found online at that website. Now that is something that young ringers can, and in my view, should become involved in. Now, the idea of that group is they are going to be running events several times a year, which are organised by young ringers for young ringers. And in fact, all of the organisation is by young ringers for young ringers. And they are also going to be able to have a mentoring scheme in place. That is part of their plan, and communication forums. So it puts young ringers across the country in touch with each other, and helps them understand that there are more young ringers out there. We've already covered that it's very, very sparse in terms of young ringers, and be able to put them together at a national level, which will then drill down into a more regional level, and then drill down into a more local level, and they understand where the other young ringers are, and they can compare experiences, and what they've been doing is a good thing. And I know it's a blatant plug for this, but I strongly suggest that all young ringers should be part of this group to help them understand what's out there. It's got a lot to offer. Okay, now to the last bit. So the parents, getting the parents on board straight away and getting to know them. You need these parents. We need these parents. Gone are the times where I can cycle 10 miles on a Wednesday evening through the countryside to go to a practice on my own, or I can get another adult ringer from another tower to take me in their car on my own to a practice night that's miles and miles away. We need the parents on board as quickly as possible to be able to help get our young ringers to the place they want to be. Try to explain what ringing is and what their child will be part of, and try to inspire the parents themselves to want their children to be part of this. So lots of practice is required in multiple locations. Parents need to understand this up front. There's no point in expecting them to know and be a taxi service out of the blue. Engage with them, explain what it means, and explain not what's expected of them, but what is expected of them if their child wants to do this. There's more to it than just rocking up once a week at a practice night. Something that's really good is tell them that their child will be a public performer on what's the biggest and loudest musical instrument. Now, something that we need to be aware of is we are public performers, and we have very, very loud musical instruments that shout out around towns and villages, and some of them are in the middle of nowhere. And actually, the children being part of that public performance is something that the parents may well be very interested in. Thinking my child is there and they are performing to the public on a very big, very loud instrument. And point out that there are local and national competitions. There are opportunities to go out and get trophies and medals and certificates and things like that. There are things to aim for, and I think getting the parents on board by trying to inspire them is really, really important. Don't let that fester. I think we all need to be doing that. Otherwise, we will lose ringers through their parents not wanting to take them around and get them engaged. Safeguarding, I'm not going to talk too much about it. I can't do a Young Ringers presentation without talking a little bit about safeguarding. Ideally, I think we all know this, all adults should have an up-to-date DBS. All adults that are certainly organising, I would suggest any adult that you want to get involved in your youth practices, you encourage a way to achieve a DBS for them. I think that's very important. And Church of England safeguarding, I would strongly advise C0 through C2. Organisers and leaders, in my view, should certainly be looking at C2. C0 and C1, they don't really cost anything. C0 and C1 you can do online, and it's only around about a couple of hours out of your life to get that safeguarding up to date. Safeguarding is a complex and big topic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is very, very important that we all keep safeguarding in the back of our minds, and in fact in the forefront of our minds when we're dealing with young ringers. Okay. Communication. That's terrible. It may be more complex than you think, not it's. I haven't proofread that very well. So first of all, communication with minors should always be done by the parent and guardian. It's common sense, and I hope I don't need to tell anybody on that. Blind copies advised, don't share email addresses, and get that bit right. But more importantly, for non-minors, you need to use the tools that they understand. Email is very 1990s. They use WhatsApp and other interesting apps that some people may not even have heard of to communicate, and that is generally the most effective way to communicate with them. Young people don't read their email, and it's just the way things work these days. So when getting the communication sorted out, make sure that you have the tools that they do and you can engage with them using those tools. Now, I could have put another 10 or so slides together for this, possibly even more, because it is such a big subject and there's such a lot to say, and I could waffle on for hours and hours about this topic, and possibly not even tell you anything that you don't already know. So hopefully I've left enough time for questions, which I will do my very best to answer.
So thank you, Colin. That was a incredibly informative and motivating presentation, so thank you very, very much. I wrote down 4 questions as you went through, and on the next slide after I wrote each question down, you answered my questions. So but I wonder if anyone else has got any questions for Colin. If you could raise your hand.
Well, whilst people are finding the raise hand, I'll just go through a couple of things that I've just opened, literally just opened the chat, and there are some comments in here that's worth raising. So the first one was from Simon Linford, and suggesting that the main practice may also be too late. Now, that's a very good point, actually. I think practices that finish at 9 o'clock for young ringers would generally be too late, and as Simon pointed out in the chat, that 6:30 to 8 is a general timing for a young ringers practice. There's a comment there on learning the ropes. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, that might be the only one I do actually want to pick out, so hopefully we've got some hands up by now.
Have anyone got any questions for Colin? Or have we gone very quiet? Colin, could you stop sharing your screen and then I can have a better view?
I can stop sharing my screen. Yes, indeed.
So we have a hand up from Simon. Simon, who we can't hear. Ah,
here comes the headset.
Yeah, that's right. Rookie error.
You're still muted, Simon.
Is that better?
That's
much better.
It doesn't normally need a remote microphone. I don't know what's going on. But no, it's a leading question, really, and it's about insisting on the kids coming to ring on Sundays, because I mean, certainly with our group, we didn't really tell them about Sunday morning ringing to start with, and Sunday morning ringing can be quite difficult for kids who do other things. To what extent do you insist on Sunday ringing being part of the package?
That's a harsh question. The simple answer to that with me is I don't insist. I suggest that it would be good to turn up on a Sunday morning, and actually I do try to make it clear that actually the tools that they are using, and I think this is an important thing, are owned by the church, and ringing on a Sunday morning is something that can give back to what they're enjoying doing, but I have never insisted on attendance on Sunday ringing. However, having said that, the vast majority of people that I've taught have come along on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, we introduced what we call church parade, that once a month the kids went to rang on a Sunday morning, and that's something that when they were good enough to go to church parade, and we called it church parade.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Stuart.
Hi. The father and son are actually going to start ringing tomorrow. The father had a try with us about 15 years ago and got so far, but didn't carry on. So that's great from the getting the parents involved. However, we've also got a couple of more elderly learners, shall we say, who've been ringing with us about 2 years and are only sort of at the round stage at the moment. And I'd just be interested in your, I guess you've had similar situations where we've had young learners with older learners, and just any tips you've got for kind of integrating them, and so they kind of work together fairly well learning.
Yeah, so I'd still go back to doing the initial teaching of the young ringers independently of that practice. There's obviously there may be a time when you want to integrate that, and actually the young ringer will overtake those slightly older ringers probably quite quickly. And in fairness to the young ring, it's a case of trying to put a structure around them that will help them progress. So it might not be an ideal situation for the older ringers in there to put the young ringers into first ring rounds with them, because actually that they haven't got that structure. It's a really difficult question to answer, and that's why when I saw at the beginning of the first line in there is how to integrate a mixed age practice, I was absolutely terrified that I'd need to talk about it because it is so difficult. I don't think I can provide you an adequate answer other than try to provide the best that you can for the young ringer, and actually perhaps take them, get some other people involved, and have some extra practices for them elsewhere.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we do have, like you were suggesting, we don't bring them along to the practice straight away. We have perhaps half a dozen sessions with them first off, to try and get the handling together. Mm-hmm. Perhaps having 2 or 3 sessions in a week, ideally.
That's good.
Yeah. And then bring them along to the practice. But I'm just anticipating they probably are going to progress more quickly, and it's just how I handle really having, you know, this youngster who hopefully will progress quite quickly with older learners that are, you know, perhaps going at a slower pace.
Mm-hmm. Having the parent there, I think, is to your advantage. Because they are more likely to stick with it if the parent is wanting to stick with it as well. I think possibly the danger for you is losing your older learners as the younger one overtakes and makes more progress. But I really hope that's not the case.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I put my hand up initially to in response to Simon about Sunday ringing. I've got two of my young ringers who are very well integrated into their own church a few miles away, and I've made it absolutely clear to them that they are members of our band, but I actually do not expect them to turn up every Sunday, because I'm not going to tell any children who are actively involved in some church in their own church attendance. I'm not going to start trying to encourage them to move away from that. I think actually that is more important than bell ringing. But on the other hand, they were both there today, including one who we sort of elected to be a full member of our band just this last Thursday. And so she rang for the first time ever today for a service, half muffled, and she was brilliant. But so yes, again, we don't insist on Sunday attendance, but on the whole, most of them do. Talking about integration with young and old, my difficulty in a way is getting some of our older ringers integrated into our main band, all of whom are under year 12, I would think. Without our young ringers, our band would hardly exist. And that is a tremendous encouragement to them, you know, knowing that they are actually the crucial part of our quite new struggling band.
Yep, that's good. A good news story, and actually making these young ringers feel that they are important to the band is absolutely the right thing to be doing.
And I noticed that Marion's put on the chat that he could arrange a court appeal for a young ringer on a Sunday to encourage attendance. So another idea there. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you very much, Colin.
Oh, I think there's a hand waving. Christine Broadley.
Christine? I can't see her.
Yeah, I think it just needs to come off mute.
Christine, you might have to unmute. No. I can't actually see Christine, Colin.
No, I couldn't see myself either.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was the problem.
Okay. Have you got a question or comment, Christine?
Yes, it was. He just mentioned teaching father and son together, and I must admit, one of my ideas was to mark it as a family activity. I thought that might be a way of getting recruits. Do you think that's an advantage to teach families together, or is it better to try and stick with the youth?
So you broke up a little bit there, Christine. Did anybody else catch that?
I think Christine was asking about whether you felt it was a good idea to actually teach families together, because that's how she's thinking about her recruitment campaign.
yeah, I don't see any problem with teaching families together. They might not all stick it, and they might not all enjoy it, but some of them may do, as long as they don't disappear as a family.
What about the engaging youth aspect of it?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Christine? Sorry.
I'm trying to speak slowly. What about the engaging youth aspect? I mean, things aren't quite so much fun if you've got your parents there, or maybe they're better if you're doing it with your family. How do you trade it off?
I think that depends on the age group. I think teenagers would be uncomfortable having their family there, because teenagers generally hate their parents. But I think certainly for younger children who are very much reliant on and look up to their parents and them doing something, certainly 8, 9, 10-year-olds, I think absolutely they'd be engaged with their parents.
Okay, Chris, you're going to have to unmute.
Sorry. In the whole engagement thing, I think very largely depends on nothing specific, but something very basic to any practice, however old or young, and that is simply to do with the atmosphere that you can create in your tower. I have got 2 people who visit us quite regularly, and again, on whom we rely. Without visitors, we can very rarely ring plain Bob yet. With them, we can do things. But those 2 visitors come to us simply because they find the atmosphere in their own towers so dire that they come over to Kildwick simply to have some fun ringing. Yep,
and I absolutely totally get that, and I think actually I think I had it's partly what I was trying to get at in one of the bullets on my slide, which was the comfortable, safe and pleasant environment, and part of that pleasant environment is actually having a nice atmosphere in the tower, and I'll go back to it again, your Victorian shouty tower captain and your stale practice is not something that young ringers are want to get involved in.
Yeah. Comfortable and safe, we're not. We're well known as the coldest tower in Yorkshire.
Anyone else? Ian?
Yeah, two issues or sort of observations really. Listening to through the presentation, I think a lot of what was said, well, it's excellent presentation. I agree with almost all of that. One of the things, though, is that much of what was said, I believe, actually applies to everybody we're teaching. It's not just about teaching young people. So everything about motivation, understanding people, personalising learning to fit everybody, is just generic. It's not related to young people, and I think we often forget that. So engaging people who struggle to engage with teaching young people, I think, are often the ones who probably are at risk of putting off some of the older learners as well. So I think there's a key issue there. And the other one is that an able 12-year-old who we come in contact with and is showing some interest in learning to ring, it's a fair chance that that able, motivated 12-year-old is already involved in 50 million other things and enjoying those other things. And they come into ringing and they find there's something there for them. But they've then got the difficult task of trying to find where the balance is for them and where ringing fits into that range of other things that they're doing. And as they develop and go through different years at school, that mix of things they're involved in will most likely change as well. So them dipping in and out of things is just what teenagers do. That's part of life for them. So I think we've got to be very careful in recognizing that and responding to it, and acknowledging that there are many times they can't come because it's a trial for the school's athletics team, or they're involved in a musical event the next weekend, and they've got 3 practices that week for the musical event. Mm-hmm. So if we don't understand that and take that on board, that is a recipe for losing them.
Yep. So 100% agree with both of those observations, and certainly on the latter one, absolutely. As soon as you start becoming dictatorial and making it absolutely mandatory to turn up to every practice on every occasion, you will start to push them away.
And one of the things that can also very, very easily cause issues, and this applies across the age group as well, the adults that you teach to ring, it may be somebody who works away 2 weeks in 3. Mm-hmm. They desperately want to learn to ring, but if they're working away 2 weeks in 3, they can't be there every week. End of story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So it is fitting those issues, fitting around all of those things, which I believe is crucial. And when somebody hasn't been there, whether young or old, somebody hasn't been there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they turn up fresh and ready to go, and somebody says, "Oh, we haven't seen you for a long time. We thought you weren't coming."
Yeah.
Yes, the other bit of that is as almost an end strategy for young ringers, and that is, as far as your tower is concerned, you are almost certain to lose them when they go off to university or whatever it is that they go on to. So I would never think about teaching young people as any sort of long-term strategy for my tower. It may well be a very good long-term strategy for that individual, but if I'm looking at it, as it were, selfishly from the point of view of my tower, it's probably a waste of my time, because they're going to go off to university or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. A young child is changing a lot from start to finish, and as Colin said, you're going to lose some, and you'll lose them at all sorts of stages. And the really painful stage is when they have become a surprise major ringer, and you lose them because they've gone off to do something quite different, and they're no longer yours. But yep. I call that money in the bank.
Yeah, I totally agree, Chris. And actually, teaching the ringer for the sake of teaching the ringer rather than the local tower, I think is absolutely admirable. And actually, it's one of the places where there was a lot of attrition, or I don't think we fixed it quite yet, is between A-levels and university. But thankfully, there's another Central Council work group called, which is about universities and how we don't lose people in those months after they finish their A-levels, and we get them introduced into university societies to keep their